We have about 15 bilateral or multilateral exercises, but again, it's important because you exchange your best practices, you look at the latest technologies, the latest tactics that have come in. There's a lot that you learn, some that you give away, and through that you keep raising your game, whether it's cricket or it's tennis or it's golf or it's combat. Unless you test yourself with the best in the world, and even with people who may come out with absolutely brand new innovative ideas, you will not be able to keep up in your game, you can't keep your edge. This situation is not going to change. What we are facing, our interests in the seas are only going to keep increasing. If the nation has to grow, which it shall, then our dependence on the seas will keep increasing, and that is why for a long time many senior naval officers have been saying 21st century with the century of the seas for India. It surely is for the last quarter century, surely will be for the balance 3 quarters of this century. It's an absolute delight to be here with you today, albeit I do note a certain amount of concern when Srikanth says fireside chat. I don't know which side and which fire. But having said that, I'm absolutely delighted at the coming together and the collaborative efforts of the MHS and the Vyakhya Foundation in bringing together a synthesis of insights into both military and maritime issues. I think it's a wonderful way forward, and this is the inaugural time this is happening. I think it sets on path a wonderful collaborative efforts that can bring in both military and maritime consciousness out there in the public field. And that's the one reason why, Srikanth, I don't know whether I agreed to it or you coerced me into it for being here. And in order to look at and promote the idea of maritime consciousness, I thought I'll give a brief kaleidoscopic view into what is happening in the maritime areas around us. We are all aware of the areas in which we are operating. Coastline after recalibration is actually above 11,000 kilometers. This is post-UNCLOS. When we spoke of the state-based lines, we measured everything. We've got 9 coastal states, 4 union territories, almost 1,400 islands, and a huge exclusive economic zone. We have managed to settle our borders, and that's no mean achievement, with 6 out of our 7 neighbors. There was obviously a certain amount of give and take, as it always will be, because you are finally buying peace, friendship, and goodwill. There will be some give and take, unlike some countries and some parties which believe give and take means you give and I take. In our case, it's been balanced. The fact that each of the treaties that India has entered into has stood the test of time, almost a century now, itself is an endorsement of the wisdom in which and the approach in which we entered each of these treaties. Even the last one, as and when the land issues are settled, on the maritime side, all surveys have been done. It would not be much of an issue. The differences are minor. The global hub, absolutely. We've got 1/3, 2/3, and 80% of all the global traffic across in this region, whether it's container traffic or it's oil, 120,000 vessels per year transiting through this region. 80% of this trade being extra-regional. That means everybody around the world, the developed world, has deep insights and stakes, and I'll come to that a little later as to how it affects us. And of course, we have got a rising amount of fishing vessels. Just in the last 10 years, it's gone up by 33%. It is about 2.4 lakhs in 2015. We've gone up to close to 3.4 lakhs today. Our dependence on the seas for our vital energy lines has only been increasing. In the late 80s, just the Bombay Eye here used to take care of 70% of our total oil requirements. Today, it caters for 5.5%. That's the growth of our energy demand over the years. Today, we have 89% of our oil is imported, and we have another about 6 to 7% that is re-exported as refined products. So our total dependence on the seas, if you add that with what is offshore, is touching a staggering 96.5% on the seas. Only 4.5% of our entire total need is met from onshore. That means if those sea lanes are disturbed, you can imagine what impact it will have on national growth and prosperity. Similarly is the case for gas. Of course, the rise is slightly lesser, but that itself is a huge field that's growing. Over the last 2 to 3 years, our traditional import patterns have changed somewhat, though we have been trying to change it over the last couple of decades, not to be over-dependent on any one region. Persian Gulf traditionally over the last 20 years has been between 60 to 65% of our import zone. But we have been expanding, trying to reach out to Venezuela, to west coast of Africa, Southeast Asia, other places, Russia. And now over the last couple of years, we've been able to finally balance out our oil imports on both seaboards. It's almost equal with about 55-46% now. And our spread is all across the world, but our key regions which we have trade on which we will always remain dependent, and hence on the sea routes to those regions, is primarily the Persian Gulf, North America and Southeast Asia. And I'll keep coming to that. The whole of EU, if you look at it, balances out with just one United States and one China, which is also there. 10 years ago, we were about 4 to 5% of the world's seafarers. Today, we are touching 15%. 1 in every 3 seafarers in the Indian Ocean region is Indian. 80% of our seafarers are actually operating on foreign bottoms, and I'll come to that also, there are double reasons for that. So the safety and security of not just the shipping that I mentioned, not just the shipping lanes, but also the Indian citizens, because in this region, 1 in every 3 ships is fully Indian. One third of the crew on all the ships is Indian. Fishing, I mentioned this briefly, but look at the growth that is taking. From 30,000 crores, just about less than a decade ago, it's risen to 60,000 crores is the entire product of fish. The annual growth rate, what we call the CAGR, is touching 8%. It's 7.9% is the rate at which the fishing has been growing year on year. Bulk of this is still inland fishing. 70% of our fishing is actually inland. Only 30% of it is offshore out in the seas. It's sadly said that many of our fish in our EEZ die of old age. We'll have to change that. And we are also producing a staggering 8.1% of the global share of fish. This is an industry that is set to further grow, which means I've already said 33% of the fishing vessels have grown. As you get more mechanized, as you go for longer sea legs, as you look at larger areas, the growth is going to be immense. To give you an example, China has almost 15 lakh fishing vessels. Any given time, you have something like 200 of their fishing vessels operating in the Indian Ocean region. Now, that is the reach of fishing globally. As we go down a decade from today, we'll find our fishing also being something like that, moving all across the global commons. We have 12 major ports. Major ports are those that are under the center, under the Ports Act, and then you've got non-major ports, intermediate and minor. The major ports are increasing. There are already 3 more have been given approval. There are another 3 on the pipelines on which the work has been done. That means in the coming decade, the major ports would have jumped by 50% of where they were. And I'll come to the capacity growth. Today, when you see that figure 16 and 30, actually that capacity has been growing at a rate of over 10.5% per year, year on year for the last 10 years. I'll come to that when we briefly touch Sagarmala. Between 30 to 40% of our GDP is seaborne trade. We also have offshore and out at sea, deep sea resources, the minerals in the deep seas. We have one block allotted to us by the International Seabed Mining Authority, where we are carrying out explorations, about 75,000 square kilometers. That's where the ocean mission that you're reading about is coming in. That's where deep research is going to take place. When you talk of rare minerals, polymanganese nodules, all of that work we are doing, that's close to 2,000 kilometers south of India. Our hydrocarbon investments, I briefly mentioned it, is 56 countries, 27 countries across with 56 such projects. Each of those is important to us. We've invested in them. Some we own, some we partially own. And our diaspora, just the remittance, we are the largest diaspora in the world. Just the remittance, simply the money saved that they're sending back, not the investment. It's just those weekly money, dollars sending back home. That's 25% more than our defense budget. That's what they're just sending back home. Good luck with trying to put sanctions on us. I mentioned the diaspora, the largest diaspora in the world. Again, 3 primary regions that they're coming from. I mentioned that. Just look at the trade figures. Look at now the foreign investment. Look at where the diaspora are. And half of these are Indian citizens, so there is a automatically legal responsibility for their safety and security that we have to look out for. Principally, it remains in Persian Gulf and West Asia, 27%, North America, 25%, and then you got Southeast Asia, close to 20%. And then, of course, there is no place in the world that you don't find Indians. I'm sure when we inhabit the moon, you'll find them there also. Because of all these reasons, you have got a huge amount of extra regional navies who have interest and who have presence in this region. At its peak, when you had 2 wars going on, it had crossed about 120 ships. But we are half at that even today. Our merchant fleet, well, it's grown. It's grown at a larger rate than the global growth. Global growth has been about 2.9% per year. We've been higher than that. In numbers and in size, in both the cases, we've been between 3.1 to 3.3%. But notwithstanding that, our total merchant fleet is less than 1% of the globe. Our total shipbuilding is also 1% of the globe. China has about a staggering 44%. South Korea has got another 26%. Japan has got about 14%. Between these 3 countries, they corner 90% of the global shipbuilding industry. In our case, today, 92.5% of our trade is carried on foreign vessels. Now, this is notwithstanding the fact that there has been an immense growth. Year on year, we've been growing higher than the global average over the last 40 years because our trade has gone up multiple times more. And in the foreseeable future, no matter what you do, over the coming decades, our dependence on foreign flag vessels will remain much higher than anywhere else. Necessarily, reaching out to other countries, having good relations, securing those sea lanes. We can make a virtue out of necessity, but it's a necessity for us to make sure those sea lanes remain safe. Because our trade, our prosperity is dependent upon that foreign ship, on that international shipping lane. We don't have a choice in the matter. Of course, public forum, I'll portray it as a virtue, but bottom line is, it's a necessity because our national growth and development is hugely dependent upon the safety of the sea lanes and the confidence of those ships. I mentioned Sagarmala. We've been through this a lot. It was conceived 20 years back, but the last 10 years been given a huge boost. There have been at times people wondering, what has it achieved? Where has it gone? Just look at the data. We had more than 50% of the projects are completed. Another 30% of them are close to being completed. They're well on way. The impact of that, as I mentioned, you had more than 10.3% year-on-year growth on the capacity of your handling at all your ports. Now, the trade has not gone on at that same rate. But earlier we used to land up in a situation here in Bombay Harbour, the demurrage time, the turnaround time for a vessel that came used to be 4 days. It used to be touching 100 hours. Today, JNPT is ahead of the global average. If the global average is touching 24 hours, JNPT is doing it in 22 hours. All that has come about because of Sagarmala, which is going and looking at developing the contact and the connectivity with ports, turning it around, spending time in that, the rails, the roads, the financial networks, all of that. Now, as that grows, automatically, so we hope the trade will grow. The trade grows, a huge amount of ships hanging around. You all are aware of the very fragile international security environment. The two countries with which we have had wars in the past, they remain potent. They remain inimical to our interests. Countries and forces that we have to keep a close eye on because you don't know when, and especially in today's scenario, you don't know when things can go south. From the most dangerous to the most likely. What keeps us busy all the time are the non-traditional threats. Actually, you can't call it non-traditional because nothing more traditional than piracy. Maritime terrorism is something that we got new, and I'll come to that, how it's grown over the years. You got piracy, you got other trafficking, HADR. These are all become increasingly in the frequency, and they're taxing us and they're drawing our attention a lot. But if you don't do that, then there is a larger canvas of what is the sense of security, who else may get involved into this. We started with terrorism coming by the seas, the inputs of the LTT, then it became directly from the seas. Then we got attacks at sea. Now you got attacks into the sea. Terrorism, as we've seen it for the last 30 years, has been evolving, getting more and more potent, spreading into a larger number of areas, and it ain't going away anytime soon. Piracy, you're all aware, since 2008, the Indian Navy has been deployed in the Gulf of Aden continuously. Still counting. More than 15 years back, at various fora, people asked us, do you have the legs for it? We said, try us. But you're 17 years and counting. We haven't lost our breath as of now, and I don't think we'll ever will. We had a stage where piracy had reached right up to the Indian EEZ. It took some very robust efforts because once the genie is out of the bottle, putting it back in takes a lot of time and effort. We had to foil something like, at that time, 45 piracy attacks, out of which 38 actually were in the Arabian Sea, 7 were in the Gulf of Aden. These are the kind of actions we had to put in. What I call the flop line, the furthest line of piracy, had to be actively pushed back with some very robust measures back into the Gulf of Aden, where it seemed to have died down and settled in till about a year ago. More on that later. Over the last 1 year, we've had a major deployment ever since piracy resurfaced, ever since you had the Houthis carrying out attacks at sea to protect our interests, to protect our cargo, to protect our ships, to protect our seafarers. Many of those actions and activities you would have read in the newspapers. We can discuss it during the chat we have later. But in effect, this is just the data of what all we've done over the last 1 year. And sometimes when my wife asks me, what do you do? And I find it very difficult to answer that. I hope I'm able to give some sort of an idea. HADR operations over the last 20 years, it's 20 years since the tsunami, have really escalated tremendously. It's literally a year hardly goes by when we are not deployed. In fact, today our ships are deployed ever ready to be able to provide support in case of an HADR contingency. And we've been deploying there some of the major ones all around. You're aware of the legal status. Ever since 2611, the Navy has been made responsible for overall maritime security. That is basically coordinating, keeping an eye on what is happening, working with all the other agencies, and trying to weld together a cohesive response, and better still, if we can maintain a favorable and positive environment by which things don't go south. So we are connecting with everybody to maintain maritime domain awareness. There's a huge effort going on, and like I said, collaborative efforts, cooperative efforts are a win-win situation for everybody. So that's been one of the strategies of the Navy for the last decade and a half. This is an actual deployment one day way back in 2012 when somebody actually asked this question to say, what do you do? So I said, declassify what we've got, remove the names of the ships. Let's take out what we are doing exactly on that one day and take it out and put it in front. Currently, we've got major deployments for various missions. The periodicity of these varies. In the Gulf of Aden, we are there, as I said, continuously. At times, we've had to escalate the number of ships depending on the situation. Otherwise, we have a pattern by which we keep visiting these areas depending upon the periodicity, the threat environment, in order to maintain, as I said, a favorable and positive maritime environment. All these engagements are there in order to build up the number of stakeholders and the sense of cooperative and collaborative efforts and mechanisms where everyone looks upon it as a sense of joint ownership. Not that you're coming into my waters. It has to be a win-win-win situation for everybody. So we're carrying out all of these engagements in all our self-interest. Any given year, we have about 15 bilateral or multilateral exercises. But again, it's important because you exchange your best practices. You look at the latest technologies, the latest tactics that have come in. There's a lot that you learn, some that you give away. And through that, you keep raising your game, whether it's cricket or it's tennis or it's golf or it's combat. Unless you test yourself with the best in the world and even with people who may come out with absolutely brand new innovative ideas, you will not be able to keep up in your game. You can't keep your edge. This situation is not going to change. What we are facing, our interests in the seas are only going to keep increasing. If the nation has to grow, which it shall, then our dependence on the seas will keep increasing. And that is why for a long time, many senior naval officers have been saying 21st century with the century of the seas for India. It surely is for the last quarter century. Surely will be for the balance 3 quarters of this century. And we will keep seeing an increase in the contestation or the competition, hopefully not conflict, but that is always around the corner. Conflict won't be there if you're ready for it. All of this are efforts that we are making in order to be able to build up a self-reliant Navy, because finally the best helping hand is the one at the end of your own arm. In order to build that up, you have to have the indigenous technology, the indigenous design. The entire supply chain has to be with you, which today it is not. But we have reached a stage where the INS Vikrant was 80% indigenous, is 80% indigenous. Some others, because weapon systems, certain propulsion are not with us, we're slightly lower, but we are getting there. Our aim is to be able to cap it at about 90% of indigenous capability across the board. We aim to be and remain a combat-ready, credible, cohesive and future-ready force.
Wonderful. I'm sure, he is well known amongst all of us for the shock and awe effect. So I'm sure you had a bit of shock and awe. Ladies and gentlemen, we are joined by him on a rather auspicious day as far as the Indian Navy is concerned. The 1st of March is a very significant day for the Indian Navy. It was on 1st of March 1968 that the Western Naval Command came to be formed from being Flag Officer Bombay to being the Flag Officer Commanding in Chief. It was the Western Naval Command. The Western Fleet got formed on the 1st of March 1968. We had the first 4-star admiral. Admiral Chatterjee became a 4-star admiral on 1st of March 1968 in recognition of the fact that the Navy had become 3-dimensional, with the submarine being commissioned a few months before that, with the Nilgiri's launch. So there was a recognition amongst the past that now the Navy was a full-fledged sort of service, and we showed immediately after that our mettle in 71 war. So 1st of March is a very, very auspicious day as far as the Navy is concerned, and I'm so happy and delighted that we have the boss of the Western Naval Command, who has also commanded the Western Fleet before, with us today. So thank you ever so much. I'll take the statement that you made. 21st century is the century of the seas. We are now in quarter century of the new century. We have seen certain events sort of framing the context of this century. It's 25 years of Kargil. It's 20 years of tsunami, as you brought out. It's a few years more after India became nuclear. It's also been since the terror attacks happened and the words canvas changed. So it's about 25 years since several landmark events happened. Much is happening now. While it would be unfair for me to ask you your geopolitical analysis, I know you're brilliant at that, but it would be unfair for me to ask you that. Please cast your gaze on the maritime dimensions of this change. How does India or Indian sea power in 21st century look when you are having a century of the seas?
Thank you, Shrikant, and thank you firstly for reminding me that this is the day that the Admiral shed his vice.
Yes.
Well, as I was mentioning to you earlier, the growth of the Navy has been commensurate with the growth of India's prosperity and dependence on the seas. Nobody better than you who's brought out so many times that we are a fledgling force at the time of independence. 33 vessels, out of which barely 6 could be called even EZ worthy, let alone blue ocean. Today we are at 130 ships. It still is too little. We are punching way above our weight. We've been successfully punching above our weight simply in boxing parlance. Admiral Shekhawat, the ace boxer that he is, will substantiate that the only way you can punch above your weight is with speed and agility. So far we've been able to manage it, but we need to build up the mass. That weight that you need to have to punch at the level at which your interests are, we are not at that level as of now. So as I see it, by the turn of this decade, I expect to see us averaging it close to 160 ships. In a decade from now, about 175 ships. Definitely, we need to have more of sea-going, ocean-going vessels with that mass and weight on them, not just the speed and agility. I see that happening. Today we are at 2 aircraft carriers. You and I have had this discussion in the past. You're well aware, right from 1948, the plans paper of the Navy has spoken of at least 4 aircraft carriers.
Yes.
I would personally feel 4 would be less.
Yes.
I would pitch the number that we need at about 5 in order to be able to have 3 carrier task forces. Is too perhaps premature to put that in the public domain today. Are we ready for it when we are still debating whether we need an aircraft carrier? By the time you realize you need it, you'll be 4 decades away from being able to build such a capability. So we certainly will need to build up our reach. That's what the aircraft carrier and the carrier task force gives you. We need that reach. Along with that reach, as I said, we need the mass. Slowly, as we're moving around, we are trying to shift the weight of our vessels from being lighter vessels to heavier with longer reach, with longer weapons, larger amount of weapons, networked across amongst themselves, with the NCO that you discussed briefly in your introductory remarks, a larger submarine force with longer sea legs, more of patrol vessels. So it's a bit sounding almost like a bit more, but It's not just the numbers, it's the capability and the ability to defend our growing interests, and more than defend, I'll say safeguard them. Admiral Billu Chauhan has got that famous line which he says, money is a coward. It always runs away from wherever there is a problem. So you need to make sure there is no problem. Only then we'll be able to retain the money in that region. So in order to maintain that security, which will give the boost to your national growth and development, and I gave you the data up front as to even today, in the last 40 years, how much have we shifted from being something like 70% of our trade was in Indian vessels to 7.5%, which is in Indian vessels in just 40 years. So where will we be in 40 years from now? Absolutely is the century of the seas.
Wonderful. I mean, much of what you sketched, some would say is very ambitious, but you and I have spoken and we've talked about 4 carriers being too less. In fact, Admiral Nanda somewhere mentioned 6 carriers. I know there are lots of carrier skeptics here, and it's good for discussion. I'll park that bit about the force levels in the follow-on question. Let me discuss a bit about punching above the weight and doing it with speed and agility. And I think that's remarkable, because when you talk of counter-piracy and all that, yes, the Indian Navy did some fantastic work 2008 to 12. I was in Kenya at that time and I was seeing that manifest very much. Admiral Arun Prakash has written of earlier times when Indian Navy wanted to send a ship, but there was certain amount of resistance in higher echelons. From there, one remarkable difference in the recent actions where the Houthis are, is we see that the Indian Navy has been up there, out there. There's no hesitancy or already there. So this agility and speed that you are talking about has been showcased very beautifully in the way that the Indian Navy is operated in the West Arabian Sea of the Gulf of Aden. We know the MV Ruan case. There are lots of others. How has that change in thinking happened? Is it simply about deployment? Is it thinking? What's the magic potion?
When you have something to protect, your focus towards its safety and security changes. all that period of time, perhaps centuries, when we did not realize how much of our prosperity depended upon the seas, we looked away from the seas. So the sea blindedness that very often various authors and analysts complain and bemoan about is largely because we did not realize how much of our growth was dependent upon the seas. You looked inwards, you felt you're self-sufficient. If I'm good enough, nobody's going to come and disturb me. Well, that's not what happened. Over the last century, I'd say, the recognition, and especially over the last 30 to 40 years, the recognition of how much our growth and prosperity is dependent upon the seas has been permeating across the polity, across the public. Of course, there have been people writing about it, educating, but the understanding has been growing. A watermark actually was, I'd say, two key points. The first was the tsunami, 2004. At that particular event, within 36 hours, the Indian Navy deployed 27 ships and 5,000 personnel. Some of the people who are deployed are sitting here. And we pushed it across from Andamans to Sri Lanka to Maldives. Maldives, we had a task force out there within 48 hours, which stayed on station for 2 months, while we ourselves were facing a challenge. Now, that is the time when people suddenly realized, it came onto larger consciousness that having a strong navy, what it can mean, though it was in a non-traditional threat. There onwards, of course, 2611, where the realization came in that your coastal security forces, the Coast Guard, was still too meager and small. Coast Guard has immensely grown. That was a watershed moment. The recognition that you need to grow the Coast Guard was there since the Kargil Review Committee and the group of ministers. In 2001, they had enunciated a plan. But that plan was hardly had moved forward by 2005-06 when this was coming out. 2005-06 when it was sanctioned. By 2008, the Coast Guard is only at about 45 vessels, and I think or 65 vessels and about 45 aircraft. Today, they are close to 155 vessels and about 85 aircraft. And I'm quite sure they will cross 2 centuries, 200 in both of these. So it is that watershed point where you suddenly realize how vulnerable you are to the seas. The third, almost at the same time, was the piracies. When the piracy hit, the economic impact of that piracy, especially when it spread, we initially didn't act fast enough. Then we acted only within the Gulf of Aden. That's why I put that slide up for you, furthest line of piracy. Immediately the piracy had spread out, it reached up to our EZ. We suddenly started finding that the entire traffic started coming into our zone, started impacting our fishing, started impacting our livelihood because people were not cutting across the Arabian Sea. And pirate attacks also started falling where the money trail was, that is the ships, they started carrying out attacks right at the edge of our EZ. So the realization and recognition that came in, what is the figure? The World Bank estimated about $18 billion a year was a loss to global economy of piracy at that time. Impact of it was being felt by us. The insurance costs even now,
yes,
a $400 insurance for per container has gone to $4,000. Movement between here and Europe. So the economic costs and implications of realizing, when traditionally people start calculating money in guns and butter, the debate really then starts shifting to the granary and the watch guard.
Excellent. One of the things, and I think you've said this repeatedly, is protection of commerce. And of course, most naval doctrine people have maintained that. And I'm glad you mentioned that. I guess though that some of the challenges for people in the white uniform, is of perception, right? How do you fight aviator boy with his glares going at 3 Mach?
You don't fight aviators with glares, never.
or an army person who does ghar mein ghus ke marenge, because protection of trade is not sexy, right? How do you tell the average Mumbaiker that if he is facing inflationary trend, it could be because of something happening at sea? I'm asking you because you've written doctrines, you've been up there. How do you sell it? Because you seem to make it. Yes, of course, the Navy has grown, but it almost seems as a response to some event, either 2611 or tsunami or piracy or something like that. Is it sort of not self-evident? Does this require a lot more telling and talking all the time?
Oh, absolutely. See, one is out of sight, out of mind. There's no doubt that when you see Top Gun or you see Officer and Gentleman, you don't think of the Navy. You really think of aviation. You look at movies. It's what you see is what you're impressed by. And the Navy is normally not seen.
Yes.
And being the silent service, you're normally not heard. So, but one is, as I said, the spread of media, the spread of the information age, the coming in of the social media, the story of what all is happening out at sea, starting from commerce, starting from the travails and challenges that those poor seafarers have faced, starting from what is happening because of piracy, starting from online studies of global trends. With globalization has come the realization that, look, how is it impacting everybody? The information age has brought a lot of things out. But yes, we have a challenge because you really can't take everybody out to sea and tell them this is what is happening there. That kind of will remain. There have been sponsorships and efforts to try and make movies, documentaries, documents, doctrines, but the spread will always be limited. So hence, as you said very correctly, bulk of this outside the Navy, the maritime consciousness had grown in an episodic and an evolutionary manner. I don't see any other way for it, frankly, till such time as it crosses a critical mass. Once it crosses that critical mass, that means once there is a certain amount of segment of the polity and the population which is aware of how closely linked their futures are to the sea, thereafter it will become self-sustaining because that is how it has been in many other countries. And that is how it will sort of remain with us. Insofar as the Navy itself is concerned, I think right in the beginning we have realized, and all my seniors are here, they are the ones who put those plans and maps out in front, that you have to not be able to rely on a larger public consciousness in order to strengthen the Navy because it's a chicken and egg. It'll be too late. So the indigenization strategy that was adopted right in the beginning was genius. I mean, way back in 1954 to set up a Naval Design Bureau when you really didn't even have a Navy to talk of. In 1948, dare I say, the boldness or even brazenness to dream of a four-carrier Navy in a plans paper, that in the direction that you have to move. And in order to reach there, knowing that you will always be the Cinderella of the forces, so hence you have to develop alternate sources of finances for yourself. That means you will get a lesser amount of the share always, but how do I get more out of that lesser share is only if I go indigenous and I invest in my indigenous industry and economy. So sort of this is the dual track that we've been taking. And as we move forward, I can only hope that with the information age, with some of these stories coming all across, that consciousness and awareness will keep increasing. And I'll wait for that critical mass. We're still short of it.
We're still short of it, but I'm so glad you mentioned 2 points here. One is indigenization. You were there when the Honorable Prime Minister was here just a few days ago when we commissioned 3 ships, Surat, Nilgiri and the submarine Vakshir. Proud moment for the Navy, proud moment for indigenization. And you have gone back to how we were ambitious right from the beginning. Our shipbuilding, has it been episodic? Has it been evolutionary, to take your sentence? Has it been a combination of both? Or is there been a bit more of jugaad? Because why I'm asking you, when we used to talk about this, we always thought that, oh, these guys, we just bought something because it was available. But now you look back at it as a historian, you see that there was remarkable foresight in some of the things we did, given the kind of balance of resources that we had to do. But from the high perch that you have been, how do you see India shipbuilding? I mean, it's come of age really, but how has that journey been from your eyes?
I'm not sure if I can say that we have come of age on shipbuilding yet.
Okay.
For warship building,
Warship building.
Warship building, we certainly crossed a certain milestone, but we still haven't crossed that level where we can say that we have become the standards of excellence. That's where we need to be. Today we are producing warships which are world class at 20 to 25% of what it would cost anybody else to make. We have approached the levels of timelines for build that are getting close to world standards. I say getting close because when we built the Delhi destroyer, you remember it took almost 10 years from launch to commissioning. Today with the Surat, from launch to commissioning was down to 31 months. 3 years is the global standard. But let's wake up. What is China doing? In 12 to 18 months. Now that is where you have to reach. So we haven't yet crossed that final line where we can say that we're at that. Also, we have critical dependencies in certain areas, propulsion, weapons, though increasingly our weapons, communication systems are all indigenous. So as I see this growth path ahead, how we managed it in the past, as you said, sheer genius. You probably have to ask Admiral Shekhawat, Admiral Rao, what they did at that time. We are the beneficiaries of the seeds that they planted and put down at that time. But we have certainly been growing in an evolutionary and an episodic manner, having invested in so many shipyards, having invested in our own design bureau, being able to bring with whatever meager budget was given to us to have extremely ambitious plans and dreams, jumping from a seaward defense boat to designing the Delhi class, to designing its third follow-on Avatar now, to now the Nilgiri class, to the aircraft carrier. I mean, if you put it on a graph sheet, there certainly is a stage at which we jumped that curve by a huge amount. We jumped way above that curve. But can I say that we are there? Not yet. We still have a lot to go. Where is the answer? The national shipbuilding has to grow. As I mentioned, the national shipbuilding today, we are about 1%. I think the figure is 1.2% of the global share of total strength of ships with us. And 0.9% is our shipbuilding global share. Now you compare that with Japan being 14%.
Yes.
24% for South Korea, 44% for China. Now till the national shipbuilding doesn't cross that much, because it is not cost effective to invest only in defense. Unlike much of the West, our spin-offs to defense have come from the civil world. The R&D has been the civil industry. And then we have adapted the civil industry into defense. Unlike in the West, they've invested in the defense and the spin-off has gone to the civil side. We need much more investment on the civil side. Now that, fortunately, you see the changes over the last couple of years that have been coming in. You've seen the recent strategy that's come out on supporting in this budget on shipyards.
Yes.
Or giving those breaks. I mean, something as simple as a foreign shipyard would get his international loans at 5 to 6%. Yours were getting it at 13 to 14%. Straight away, your vessels will be 8 to 9% more expensive than his. So now with these changes that are coming in, how much time will it take for us? I can't venture a guess, but I think it's a very positive moment that is there given to us. And as I see the national shipbuilding efforts growing, I see increasing spin-offs coming from that into the warship shipbuilding.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I think we've reached the end of our time. You'll all agree it's been insightful, incisive, informative. So the lesson we've taken from this whole afternoon is this. From Sanjeev Sanyal, we learned the Chinese Navy, that it takes centuries to build a navy, some short-sightedness to kill it. From the Maratha history, we learned how the government and the navy has to tango together. From the 71 war and navy and the nation, we found out how the navy contributed and came to the high table. And now you hear about the Navy in the 21st century, a proud Navy, of which our CNC is a wonderful representative. I think you have covered the entire spectrum of maritime operations from almost from Harappa until present day. I'm sure you'll all agree it's been wonderful 3 or 4 hours. Thank you very much for being there. Thank you, Admiral Jasjit Singh, for...
Thanks, Sri.